What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and in this video, I'm going to be going through my top 36 wide receivers for Week 13 of the NFL season. As always, if you have any questions before I do get into the rankings, you can drop those down below. Start sits, trade advice, waivers, and then if you guys do enjoy the video, just do me a huge favor and hit that like button. And if you are not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel. So starting it off with the top four, this is pretty much like the big four consensus every single week. It was the big five when Cooper Kupp was healthy. But for these four wide receivers, going Devontae at 1, Diggs at 2, Tyreek Hill at 3, Justin Jefferson at 4. Really, the differentiating factor here is just the matchup for Davante Adams. Diggs, Hill, and Jefferson all have decently tough matchups. Davante Adams definitely more of a softer matchup here going up against the Chargers defense. Then after those four, I have Amon-Ra here at 5. As you guys know, I'm very high on Amon-Ra. Dude commands a ton of volume, has the big playability also, so I like him at number 5. Number 6, CeeDee Lamb going up against the Colts. I feel like we had that tier of the top four guys, and then I feel like we have another tier with Amon-Ra, Lamb, Waddle, and A.J. Brown. Obviously, you're going to be playing those guys. Put them in any order you want. I wouldn't be, too upset. Number 9, I have T. Higgins. So I know Jamar Chase is very likely to return, like I have him in these rankings, but I do think Higgins will be the better play this week. I wouldn't be surprised if Jamar Chase maybe he's 100%, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're kind of easing him back in. Maybe he's, 70, 80% of the routes. So he's definitely still startable, but I wouldn't be, scared off of T. Higgins. I think he'll be a top 10 guy this week going up against the Steelers. 10, I have Amari Cooper. He gets Deshaun Watson here. Now, it may honestly be a game script where they just go ahead early. Nick Chubb rushes for like 250 yards and they seal it out. But I just think rest of season, Amari Cooper is going to be a stud with Deshaun Watson. Number 11, I have Keenan Allen. Looks like Keenan's back. He's had back-to-back solid performances, and then he has a great matchup here against the Raiders, who have just been giving up a ton of points, especially to the wide receivers. Number 12, I have Chris Godwin. I think, there are a few factors here. Chris Godwin has just been a volume monster, basically since he returned from what I believe was a hamstring injury, which he hurt, after returning from the ACL. And then this is also a matchup where Mike Evans has historically had a really rough time going up against Marshawn Lattimore. So if Evans is getting locked up, he's also not looked great as of late, Mike Evans. If Evans is getting locked up, that's going to lead to a ton of targets here for Chris Godwin. Now moving into the wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 13 to wide receiver 24, I have DK Metcalf here at 13, going up against the Rams. I think he's a very high-end wide receiver 2. I mentioned him, Jamar Chase. I have him here at 14, so I'm not low on him. I still think he's very startable in your lineups, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like I said, 70, 80% of the routes. Now, a guy like Jamar Chase, if he's getting that number of routes, he can still be a great fantasy option. A lot of other guys, probably not. Obviously, Jamar Chase is the best of the best. He would be in that tier with those guys I was talking about in the top 4 if he was fully healthy. So, high-end wide receiver 2 this week, would expect him to just bounce back up to that elite group in week 14. At 15, I have Christian Kirk. Great matchup here against the Lions. Had a down game, but, we saw Zay Jones go crazy. It'll happen. I think he's a great option this week. Chris Olave going up against the Buccaneers. I would love to see Jameis at quarterback. Not sure if we're going to get it, but even with Dalton, Olave's been fine. I think he's a solid wide receiver too. 17, I have Deebo Samuel going up against the Dolphins. This is a great matchup here for the 49ers wide receivers, just pass catchers in general, their weapons. I think Deebo, even though Ayuk has been impressive, still like him as the top option in that offense as a pass catcher. So mid-tier wide receiver 2 for Deebo. 18, I have Michael Pittman. I feel like people just kind of threw Pittman away. They left him for dead. Even when Matt Ryan was back, he has just been very solid, very consistent. The volume is there. We saw him get into the end zone, which is something that he had been struggling to do. I think he's a very solid mid-tier wide receiver 2 play. Same thing with Tyler Lockett, who I have here at 19. Mentioned DK Metcalf as a high-end wide receiver 2. I like Lockett just behind him as a mid-tier option. 20, I have Mike Evans. Like I talked about, the splits against Marshawn Lattimore have not been great. I honestly don't really know what's going on with Mike Evans here. He could be a little banged up. I don't know if you guys saw the highlights from the Bucs game against the Browns, but there were opportunities where Brady was throwing to him deep. He looked slow. There was even one where it landed basically like a foot in front of him, and he didn't even stick his arms out. It was a pretty weird play. The connection hasn't been there. Not a great matchup. So, typically he's a borderline wide receiver 1. This week, more of a back-end wide receiver 2. At 21, I have Terry McLaurin. He's had back-to-back, underwhelming performances. Still think he's a great wide receiver 2 option moving forward. We have Garrett Wilson coming off of a massive game in week 12. Mike White obviously helping out Garrett Wilson here. We know Garrett Wilson is talented. He just needed a quarterback that was going to have some sort of volume, some sort of upside. He has it, so I think he's a locked and loaded start moving forward. Another rookie right behind him here, Christian Watson. Another great matchup here against the Bears. I think he's definitely the Packers wide receiver you want to be going with, probably rest of season. He has this huge big playability. He's, done it in 3 consecutive weeks, so I like him as a back-end wide receiver 2. Talking about Debo, I like the matchup. Same thing here with Brandon Ayuk. He has been very impressive this season. There's just a lot of weapons on that 49ers team who kind of need to be fed. Now moving into the wide receiver 3s, wide receiver 25 to wide receiver 36. I have Devonta Smith here at 25, 9 targets in the 2 games without Dallas Goedert. I think if he can keep commanding that type of volume, there are going to be some big games ahead here for Devonta Smith. Eagles, high-scoring offense, like him as a borderline wide receiver 2. At 26, I have Courtland Sutton. I'm not expecting Jerry Jeudy to play in this game. I think if Jeudy plays, maybe Doc Sutton a few spots here. If Jeudy doesn't, maybe you could argue him as like a back-end wide receiver 2. Obviously not a good offense, but if he's the number 1 here with no Jeudy, he's still going to get a solid number of targets. At 27, I have Jacoby Myers going up against the Bills. Still decently high on Jacoby Myers, probably much higher on him than consensus. I still think he's a very solid start here going up against Buffalo. 28, I have Josh Palmer. I'm not expecting Mike Williams to play in this game, so I think that is a boost for Palmer. A great matchup here against the Raiders, so I do like him here as a high-end wide receiver 3. I think you can still, continue to throw him into your flex wide receiver 3 option. 29, I have Gabe Davis. This is not a great matchup here against the Patriots. We know Gabe Davis always has that weekly, boom ability. He could go out. He could give you 30-plus points. He could also go out and give you 4. It's the risk you play with Gabe Davis. 30, I have Juju Smith-Schuster. And if I knew Juju would get the wide receiver 1 routes, he'd be a locked-in top probably 20 wide receiver. Unfortunately, coming back from that concussion, his usage was very limited. And it's possible it bounces back. It's possible they also continue to ease him back in. It just makes him a risky play because if that usage stays from last week where he's like splitting the wide receiver 3 snaps, not really getting in the red zone, it's just not a usage that's going to lead to fantasy production. So some risk there also with Juju. 31, I have Donovan Peoples-Jones. I'm very high on DPJ moving forward. I would not be surprised if in week 14, week 15, I'm listing this man as a top 24 wide receiver. I think Deshaun Watson is going to be huge for this guy. With Brissett, he proved that he is talented. He can produce. Now you just upgrade the ceiling of that offense, upgrade the passing volume. I think DPJ is someone who will be very interesting moving forward. 32, I have Allen Lazard. I like the matchup here against the Bears. Like I said, I do think Christian Watson's the guy, but I do think Allen Lazard is still startable in the mid-tier wide receiver 3 range. 33, I have Darius Slayton, the clear-cut wide receiver 1 for the Giants going up against the Commanders. Then at 34, I have Treylon Burks. Big fan of Treylon Burks. He's going up against the Eagles. It's a tough matchup, but I'm just betting on the rookie's talent here. 35, I have Zay Jones. I mentioned him with Christian Kirk. He's coming off of a massive performance. I think he's someone who's fringe startable in plus matchups. This is a great matchup here against the Lions for him. So I do think back-end wide receiver 3 is fair. And then to wrap up these rankings, I have George Pickens here going up against the Falcons. Pains me to not have Deontay Johnson in these rankings. Pains me to rank Pickens ahead of him. But that's just where we're at this point. Pickens has more touchdown upside and has the big playability, which is just something we have not seen out of Deontay. So that's going to wrap it up for the top 36. I posted my top 36 running backs if you guys are interested in that video. It's already up on my channel, so go check it out if you are interested. Any questions, drop them down below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.